Good morning. It is Monday, March 14th, 2022. It is noon in Ukraine, and we start with a Fox News alert. Russian forces now carrying out a new round of deadly attacks, once again near the capital city of Kyiv.
And right now, Ukrainian and Russian delegations meeting in hopes of reaching a resolution as more innocent people become victims of Putin's war. This as new tributes emerge for the award-winning American journalist shot dead.
Trey Yingst is live as NATO allies raise new concerns following the airstrike on a military base near the Polish border. And it killed 35 people. Trey, thanks for being with us this morning. The focus, of course, is on the dozen or so miles this airbase is from the Polish border. The point of focus that I think several of us have had over the last 24 hours is what was going on at that airbase? What was the nature of that airbase? Why was it a target?
Yeah, Steve, Will, Rachel, good morning. We are learning more about that airbase that was being used as a training ground in recent months with U.S. forces there as recently as February. And it's a significant target because it is so close to the Polish border. And we just see the Russians expanding their strikes further west. This does come as that American photojournalist was killed yesterday in the town of Irpin. The person who was traveling with him describes what happened when they approached Russian troops.
We crossed a checkpoint and they start shooting at us. So the driver turned around and they kept shooting. It's two of us. My friend is Brent Renault, and he's been shot and left behind.
Now, we do know White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan is calling Brent Renault's death, quote, horrifying. He had this to say.
This is obviously shocking and horrifying. I will be consulting with my colleagues. We'll be consulting with the Ukrainians to determine how this happened and then to measure and execute appropriate consequences.
Another tragic update. This as we learn the pregnant mother pictured here being carried out of a hospital that was bombed in Mariupol, that southern Ukrainian city, has passed away. Russian shelling is getting heavier and closer to the capital of Kyiv today. This morning, an apartment building was hit in the northern part of the city, killing 2 civilians there and injuring 12 others. You can see in this video firefighters climbing into the structure, looking for survivors. This type of destruction that we saw in Mariupol and Kharkiv will get more common as Russian forces get closer to the capital of Kyiv. We're also getting new images today from the town of Irpin, just outside the Ukrainian capital, where that American journalist was killed yesterday. This drone footage shows the Ukrainians firing on Russian forces in the city. The Russian troops control at least 30% of Irpin at this point, and the mayor of the city says about a sixth of the residents remain. East of Kyiv is also under heavy fire by Russian forces. We visited the front lines there over the weekend.
There may be an offensive today. They have strengthened their forces. Each time their column is ready, we hit them.
To the east of Kyiv, Ukrainian soldiers wait for enemy troops to arrive. A sign above them reads, Russia, welcome to hell.
This is the eastern front of this conflict outside of the capital of Kyiv. Just a few days ago, Russian forces attempted to bring a tank convoy down this road and toward the capital city. They were hit hard by Ukrainian forces who were able to create a new front line.
There was a big column of enemy tanks, one soldier says, approximately 100 military vehicles. They were shooting at residential buildings.
Russians is there. All right, okay.
Ukrainian air defense systems active across the city today as shelling is getting closer and closer. Those loud booms on the horizon indicating the Russians are continuing that shelling day and night. Back to you.
Hey, Trey, I've got a question for you. I know that both sides are going to have more peace talks later today there in Ukraine, where it is just a little afternoon. Ukraine, though, for the first time, actually sounds optimistic. They say it sounds like something's going on with Russia. Do we have any idea why they feel the optimism?
I think they see the troops that Russia is recruiting to come fight in this war. They're going to Syria to get fighters to come to Ukraine. And it just gives you a sense of how heavy the Russians got hit early on. I think Ukrainian forces realize the resistance they are putting up. They understand they have more weapons coming in from their allies, and the Russian forces are on their heels in some parts of this country. So I think that's part of it, and I think the other part of it has to do with the resolve of the Ukrainian people and the leadership here in Kyiv. They are saying that they'll stay here and they will fight, and Russia understands that and realizes this is not going to be that easy 2 or 3 days to take over the Ukrainian capital. It's been nearly 3 weeks, and they haven't been able to do so.
Trey, has the killing of this U.S. reporter changed any of the ways that you and other journalists are operating?
It's definitely a tragic development, and it's just something that happens sometimes in war, and I think that you have a lot of emotions about these types of things. Sometimes you feel guilty because we had just been there and we had planned to go back. Sometimes you start thinking through these scenarios, well, if I was there, could I have helped? And the bottom line is that our colleagues in this industry across the board at every outlet are doing their best to tell this story in a holistic way and bring light to this very dark place right now. And Brent was one of those people trying to do that when he was killed yesterday.
Hey, Trey, a couple of quick questions on the nature of this tragedy with Brent Renaud. I know that he was carrying a New York Times badge. The Times puts out a statement that says he was not currently reporting for the New York Times. Do we know who he was working for or what he was working on in Ukraine? Trey, do we still have you? All right, looks like Trey's shot has frozen there, understandably half a globe away.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We've actually been amazed at how well satellite and internet and everything else has been working given the circumstances. But yeah, too bad we lost them.
Because they've got infrastructure there. They've got water. They've got electricity. They've got they've got social media and stuff like that. And yesterday, I thought it was very inspiring. You may have been covering it on your program yesterday on Fox and Friends Weekend, where the president, Zelensky, went to the hospital and presented those medals to the men who had fought and were injured, and took some selfies with them. And, you know, it's that kind of image of Mr. Zelensky against Vladimir Putin that just has the whole world, for the most part, on their side. What's interesting, later on today, Jake Sullivan, our top diplomat, is going to sit down with China's top diplomat, and they're going to do it in Rome. And this particular meeting has been set up since November. I mean, remember when President Biden met via Zoom with President Xi in November? This was going to be the follow-up. So in addition to international competition between the United States and China, apparently Jake Sullivan's going to say, hey, China, we don't like the fact that you are on Russia's side on this, period.
Or help us bring about peace. Who knows if that's actually in the interests of China or not. I just want to say, I'm really glad that you brought up that question about this sort of hopefulness around this potential peace deal. I asked Trey Yingst that yesterday when I was on the Big Sunday show, and he was very much said he didn't feel very hopeful that the Russians, you know, often act like they're going to, you know, enter into negotiations as they're shelling and getting more, you know, aggressive militarily. But I don't know, maybe things are changing. You have to imagine that, you know, Putin has a lot of friends who are oligarchs. Their yachts are being seized, their, you know, assets, a lot of them having their kids being kicked out of their, you know, shishi private schools. He may start to be getting that kind of pressure from the people around him. He can't appear to be weak. He'll be taken out by someone. So maybe there's some internal things going on in Russia as well that are bringing some hope as well.
It's possible. That's hopeful. Francis Fukuyama somehow has acquired the title of a futurist, or whatever it may be, whatever a futurist does. He at times has interesting thoughts. And there is a thought process that there's going to be a difficulty in finding a compromise between the Ukrainians and the Russians because, to use a poker analogy, they're both somewhat pot committed. The level of sacrifice that's gone into this war so far would be difficult to justify right now. It'd be difficult to find a compromise with the level of sacrifice. But, Steve, you brought up this nature of the Russian-Chinese relationship. And it's fascinating. The Russians have made a request of the Chinese to backfill some of their needs for weaponry, to step up and help them. And Jake Sullivan said, if that happens, China should be prepared for real sanctions.
Would you sanction China if they did help out Russia?
I'm not going to sit here publicly and brandish threats, but what I will tell you is that we are communicating directly, privately to Beijing, that there will absolutely be consequences for large-scale sanctions, evasion efforts, or support to Russia to backfill them. We will not allow that to go forward and allow there to be a lifeline to Russia from these economic sanctions from any country anywhere in the world.
I'm not sure how scared China is of that statement by Jake Sullivan, but I will say that Representative Mike Waltz has been on the danger talking for a long time, and I've had him on my podcast. I don't know if you have too, Will, but he's been talking about the danger of that China-Russia alignment for a long time. Here he is talking about it last night on Steve Hilton's The Next Revolution.
Well, I think in the big picture, we're seeing an alignment of the world's autocracies, of the world's dictatorships are presenting a united front. Russia, China, both are involved in the negotiations with Iran, unbelievably, with the Russians as the intermediary. North Korea, who just launched yet another strategic ballistic missile, and all of them even aligned and starting to align with the Taliban superstate. The terrorist superstate that is in Afghanistan now. So, big picture, this is incredibly concerning.
Yeah, it would be incredibly concerning. And we've been talking a little bit, and you heard the news flash last night that apparently Russia has asked, according to the New York Times, I think, has asked China for help with economic and military help. It was very vague. So we don't know exactly what that was. Now, China is coming out today, and they're dismissing it. They say the U.S. side has been spreading false information against China, one after another, on the Ukraine issue with sinister intentions. So, you know, it will be interesting to see what happens today with the sit-down between our two top diplomats, ours and China's, in Rome, because we've heard these stories over the last 3 or 4 days that Mr. Xi, pictured screen left right there, doesn't like the way it's going for Mr. Putin in Ukraine. And Mr. Xi feels like he and China are suffering reputational damage because they've aligned themselves with Russia. They thought, as Putin did, that he was going to roll in, and 2 days later it would be done. Okay, put the flag out front. Didn't work out. We're now in day 19, and Mr. Xi, looking at the world stage, is realizing, you know what? Vladimir kind of sold me a bill of goods. He said it was going to be easy. It's not easy, and we both look bad.
Hopefully that self-reflection extends to any future plans to invade Taiwan. Well, you know, the relationship between China and Russia is a fascinating one, and it is not an easy partnership, historically or in the present tense.
Ever.
Really, the only thing that aligns these two countries is a mutual understanding that the United States is their adversary. And so we need to understand that is what motivates this partnership. It's still, no matter how uneasy it may be between them, is focused on the West, focused on the United States, and to be clear-eyed, sees us as their international enemy.
But Jake Sullivan said that, you know, there would be repercussions, that there would be sanctions if, you know, they were supplying and so forth. The truth is, and, you know, the kind of universal, and to include corporations, sanctions that we've seen in Russia simply would not happen with China because our corporations are far too dependent on that market. And so I think she absolutely understands that he has an advantage over Russia on many fronts, but including that one.
Well, peace talks today in Ukraine. Let's hope something does happen.
Ukraine give peace a chance.
Yeah, Ukraine is adamant. They want an immediate ceasefire, and they want Russia to leave. And something they have heard across the table makes them think there is a reason for optimism. Fingers crossed. All right. Meanwhile, coming up, as war rages in Ukraine, President Biden is shifting the focus to the economy. But as inflation rises at a record pace, will he continue to blame Vladimir Putin as he did last week? I remember, thank you very much, Carly. I remember when broadcast news came out and so many people didn't realize, wait a minute, while the anchor man is talking, there's somebody in their ear telling them something? He did it so artfully.
That is a question, by the way, whenever you meet someone back home. They're always asking about whatever comes through your ear.
Right.
And how distracting it may be or what's being fed to you to say. I can promise you nothing is being fed to say, but it is very distracting.
Oh, I don't know what's coming into yours.
That's a message to the producers.
The stuff I get is always great. I love the stuff they talk about.
No surprise.
What's that? Okay, they're saying move on.
That's what you get all the time.
All day.
Listen, we have a certain amount of time. We got to
get through the news.
I was down in Florida last week, and everybody was talking about two things. The second thing was always about, and what do you think about Ukraine? The first thing was, what do you think about these prices? And the way they would start is, I just filled up my car and it was $130, stuff like that. I bought gas yesterday in Florida. It was at a self-serve station. It was premium, but it was $5.25 a gallon in Florida. And take a look at the national averages. Today, a gallon of regular, $4.33. Last week, it was about $4 last month, $3.50 last year. Look at that, way south of $1. It's across the board.
Well, not to sound like Heidi Heitkamp, but what are you doing, Steve, buying premium? You're blowing that octane out your tailpipe. Don't buy premium, buy regular.
It gets rid of the rattle.
And the reason I bring up Heidi Heitkamp, by the way, is because the North Dakota senator has said it's your fault. Gas prices are your fault. You've come to expect cheap gas prices, and you shouldn't have. Watch.
Blame the party in power. You know, the administration wasn't aggressive enough, in my opinion, in pushing back on the red herrings. Can I just say that is an artificially low price that you're starting from. And when you do inflation adjustment, this isn't the highest price we've had in the last 20 years. In fact, George Herb Walker Bush and under the George Bush administration, we had gas prices inflation adjusted over $5. But we're shocked because we got used to $2 gas. And that's the problem.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
It's our fault. It's our fault for wanting to live a good life and have our groceries be a little cheaper and maybe save a little money and go camping or go on vacation. How selfish of us. How absolutely selfish of us.
Well, they would like, there are a lot of people on the political left who would like gas to be $12 a gallon, so we don't drive as much.
That's exactly it.
And so
it's
there's
by design.
There are a lot of people who are frustrated on the political left that now during these, you know, the supply seems to be shrinking on the world spot market. But Joe is frustrating those on the political left who see this as a moment to break away from fossil fuels and instead of produce more. And by the way, I saw that sticker down in Florida at the gas station I was at.
Yeah, my sister sent me a shot of that when she was in Arlington, Virginia, and she's like, "This isn't a very liberal a very conservative area that I'm in, and look what I just saw on my gas at the gas station." I'll say this: if you are a politician who is saying that we shouldn't have low gas prices, you must not like your constituents. You must not like this country. I mean, low gas prices allow people to prosper, to live, a middle-class life. It's unbelievable to me that that is the response to it. But it is by design. If you go back and you look at, there are clips of Hillary Clinton saying that we need gas prices to go higher. There are clips from Barack Obama also advocating for higher energy costs as a way to wean us off of fossil fuels. This is what they believe. This is the radical climate agenda. And they think they're going to normalize us to this. The problem is it was just a year ago that we had low gas prices and people just want to go back to the good old times of the Trump economy.
You know, Rachel, sometimes the news is complicated and sometimes it's simple. And I wholeheartedly agree with you that moments like this where you hear Heidi Heitkamp say it's our fault for wanting cheap gas prices reveal an antagonism, not just towards those who they disagree with, but their way of life.
Yes.
You pair that with Hillary Clinton calling people deplorables. You pair that with Stephen Colbert saying, I'm ready for $15 a gas. I want to have a clean conscience. You look at this, and it's not just about you, but it's your way of life that is truly at the center of the bullseye.
Yeah, because if you're Steve Colbert, you can, as he said in that clip that you just referred to, he says, well, I have a Tesla. And other people who believe that it's okay to have, $5, $6 gas, maybe live in, urban areas where they don't have to drive. If you live in rural areas, you have to drive to work.
You got no choice.
You have no choice.
It's 25 miles to the grocery store.
That's right.
New poll out over this weekend, 77% of Americans support banning Russian oil, and they're okay with it to combat Putin and Ukraine. But 70% blame President Biden for the prices. And here's the thing, and this was laid bare by our White House correspondent last week, who said, listen to the reason from the podium why gas prices were so high, and they blame President Putin. And our correspondent said, hey, wait a minute. Last month you blamed the pandemic when we hit a 40-year high for inflation. So are you going to blame Putin for everything between here and the midterms? And the answer not what they gave, but the answer will be yes, of course.
It was great when he asked if Joe Biden had an electric vehicle. Absolutely perfect.
Don't think it was electrifying.
All right. Now to the NFL. Huge news. Tom Brady set to return for his 23rd NFL season.
Brady saying he plans to return to football next year after announcing his retirement just last month.
And last month, I predicted this. Todd Pyro is live with more on Brady's decision to unretire.
Guys, didn't this shake things up last night, right? The GOAT making a comeback after announcing his retirement just 40 days ago. Tom Brady says he's returning to the NFL. Brady saying on social media, quote, "These past 2 months, I've realized my place is still on the field and not in the stands. That time will come, but it's not now. I'm coming back for my 23rd season in Tampa. Unfinished business, LFG." We're going to explain what LFG means to people over 40 and non-New York Mets fans in a moment. But first, the 7-time Super Bowl champ sending shockwaves through the sports world by coming back to the NFL. When he announced his retirement, Brady said he needed to focus his time and energy on other things, including his family. But apparently that's changed. The 44-year-old still arguably the best quarterback in all of football. He led the NFL in passing yards, touchdowns, and completions last season. But his Tampa Bay Buccaneers were eliminated by the eventual Super Bowl champion Los Angeles Rams in the divisional round of the playoffs. Brady's comeback may have been inspired by the GOAT of the other football. Over the weekend, he was in England, not New England, but the real England, to see soccer superstar Cristiano Ronaldo as he scored 3 goals in a Premier League match just hours before Brady announced his comeback. The final touchdown ball that he threw in the playoff defeat against L.A. was auctioned off for $518,000. Putting aside for a moment whether those people want their money back because it's no longer the final, LFG is not a mistake that he wrote. He wasn't referring to LNG. This isn't a reference to liquefied natural gas. He's not coming back because of high energy costs. This wasn't that. The F is a curse that we can't say on TV.
I wanted to see how you were going to do this.
Yeah.
And also, what does it have to do with the Mets? Everyone knows what LFG means.
Oh, I don't know about that. People over 40 a lot of times don't know what it is, and people say it was started by the Mets with a thing that they put on social media, LFG Mets. I'll leave it at that.
I just want to
look
tell
it
you
up.
one
Science.
last poll that came out. It was women who wanted Brady to come back, and it was overwhelmingly for Tom
Hey,
Brady
that
to come
moment
back.
that Todd brought up with Ronaldo, he watched Ronaldo score 3 goals, but at the end of the game, they met on the field, and Ronaldo goes, "So you're done?" And Brady goes,
That was the hint.
And then a few hours later, we get the news.
Boom. Thank you, Todd.
Thanks, Todd. All right, coming up, Russia turning to China for military and financial support after invading Ukraine. The danger this alliance poses to global security. Fox News confirming Russia asked China for military equipment and economic support after launching its invasion of Ukraine. Now, this comes as the Kremlin upped its offensive with an airstrike on a Ukrainian military training center, killing 35 people and injuring over 100, just 15 miles from the border of Poland. Retired Brigadier General and New Hampshire Senate candidate Don Bolduc is here to react. General, thank you for being with us. Let's start with this airstrike in western Ukraine. You can see here, for those watching at home, as we mentioned, just 15 miles from the Polish border. But I would love to ask you about potentially another red line, and that is, what was going on, in your estimation, at this Yavoriv military training center? We've heard reports that as recently as a month ago, the Florida National Guard was stationed there, American troops at this base. We know there are weapons flowing into Poland, into Ukraine from that Polish border. Vladimir Putin said he's going to strike any supply chain of weaponry going into Ukraine. What do you think was going on at this airbase?
Well, I think it was training, advising, assisting, staging base to move forward to areas within Ukraine that needed reinforcements of, ammunition, stingers, javelins, anything else that came in there. So I think it was being used predominantly for that. And of course, I don't think it's a surprise that Putin would see that as a target, since he sees civilians as a target, and he's a war criminal. So he's going to attack just about anything he possibly can, and then justify it as a military target.
General, do you think that there are reports there were no American military personnel at this air base? If it's a supply center, a resupply center of weaponry, any NATO personnel, Polish, soldiers helping deliver this weaponry, or can we assume this was simply Ukrainian military?
Well, I think it's a safe assumption that it's Ukrainian military. I I would have to, excuse me, I would have to suggest that going over the border at this time is probably not anything that the administration has approved. I mean, we saw that in last December that they shut off a Pentagon plan to do just that. So I would say it's Ukrainian run and Ukrainian occupied.
I want to get quickly to this Chinese-Russian relationship, the reports that Russia is asking China to backfill weaponry. It's my understanding that, at least historically, China buys from Russia, not the other way around. So if it's true that Russia is asking China for help, what does that tell you?
Well, it's a huge concern, and of course it confirms their allegiance. Also, we can't factor out North Korea and Iran. China has made its choice. It's picked Vladimir Putin, a war criminal, and his war crime invasion over Ukraine in the West. We can't stop Russia or China from giving military equipment to countries in other places of the world. It's highly unlikely that we'll be able to stop them from doing this. China's an existential threat, and with Russia, North Korea, and Iran added in there, this is extremely dangerous.
Right. Yeah, fascinating moment that reveals the Russian military may be weaker, in more trouble than we originally thought, if they've had to reverse the relationship and now ask for military aid from China. All right, General, thank you for enlightening us on these two issues this morning. Appreciate your time.
Well, thank you, Will, and God bless you.
Thank you. All right, coming up, Jussie Smollett waking up today in a different jail cell. Why the disgraced actor is reportedly moving to the psych ward. No surprise, I guess. Plus, the Federal Reserve set to raise interest rates for the first time in 2 years. Charles Payne on what it could mean for your wallet next.
Interest rates this week for the first time since 2018. What does it mean for your wallet? As you can see right here in the big studio, we got the host of Making Money on Fox Business, Charles Payne. Charles,
good morning.
Why is the Federal Reserve going to jack up interest?
They're trying to slow down the economy. That's typically what they do. These interest rate hikes, if you can think about it, as speed bumps. And the reason why it's sort of controversial now is, first of all, they should have put them in a long time ago. Secondly, it's rare they do it under conditions that we have right now. Again, it's usually when the economy is hot and accelerating. We're in an economy now, arguably, that's decelerating. And so it's another experiment, if you will, on the part of the Federal Reserve, in part because they should have probably taken this action at least a year ago, at minimum.
Were you drinking your coffee when the White House essentially blamed Vladimir Putin for the Putin price hike? The inflation was at a 40-year high before the invasion, and now they're blaming Putin.
Well, they blame Putin, they blame greedy corporations, the Trump card expired, and then over the weekend, apparently they started blaming their own voters. So I mean, it's like, I guess when you get to the bottom of the deck of the blame card, the last one is like, blame the people that put you in office. They don't care. It is sort of despicable because listen, a lot of things factor into inflation, but arguably that $1.9 trillion was completely unnecessary. The so-called COVID Relief Act, the American Rescue Plan, which, by the way, had its birthday last week. Happy birthday. The only thing that's happened since then is prices have gone absolutely through the roof. And all of those gains, last month, all the wage gains were erased. People's real wages were down 2.6% year over year.
Okay, so you can see right there, gas, hotels, stuff is just through the roof. And one of the things that my wife and I notice when we go to the grocery store, sure, the prices are up. It just seems like everything is $1 more. Or what a company is doing is they're putting less stuff in the packages. A big news story came out over the weekend. Doritos, they've taken 5 chips out. Apparently that happened a year or two ago. But you were talking to your wife, the research department, about this segment, and she went to the pantry.
She went to the pantry, She said, you know what? So my sister-in-law came by the house Friday with this tuna fish. She was really pumped. She said it was a few pennies less. My wife went to the pantry and said, yeah, but check this out. Commensurate, the price didn't go down enough to offset how much less tuna fish you're getting. So, I mean, people see this. Everyday people see this all the time. This is what you live with. And ironically, I'm not sure how the Federal Reserve even accounts for that. This is inflation in real life. This is what happens. Your money goes a lot further. A lot less further, rather, and you get fewer things. And people realize this. So on Friday, we had the consumer sentiment number out. It was so awful. In fact, it was at a point that is always is always correlated to recessions. And, you know, listen, I don't know what the White House plans to do about it. The blame game isn't working. Independents, 6 months from now, they see things a lot worse. Democrats see things a lot worse, and forget about Republicans. So the American public is united on one thing. When you give them this and tell them it's this, they say it's, you know, what was that? There was a phrase they used in the last segment, 3 letters. I forget what.
You can make chicken salad,
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
All right. Charles, we're going to be watching you over on Making Money with Charles Payne, 2 o'clock this afternoon over on Fox.